This is Chapter 13, Public Presentations to Inform. In Chapter 13, we're going to look at how to prepare an informative presentation, which is upcoming very soon, how to effectively present information to an audience, skills you need for informative speaking, how to use visual resources to inform, and we're going to look at some notes on sample informative speech outline and note cards. Preparing an informative presentation, there's a couple things we need to do. First of all, you need to think, what is your goal and what is your purpose with your informative speech? When we talk about what your goal is of the informative speech, there's 5 goals that the author likes to use, and these are really good goals. So when you set out to prepare an informative presentation, first you have to consider, again, the goals. To increase what your listeners know about a topic is a great goal. The goal of to help your audience learn useful information, another great goal. A really good goal is to clarify a complex issue and or issues surrounding one big issue, and there's many of those. Another great goal is to demonstrate something useful, how to make things, how to cook things, how to exercise, how to study, anything that you can think of. And another one is to show how things relate in space. Really good goals. Let's break these down a little bit further so you can get a good idea in your head of what's going on. Some sample topics for informative speeches, and their goals are these. To increase what your listener already knows about a topic or doesn't even know about a topic, you can use topics such as the newest trends in green designs for houses. Now again, in green design, there's already some old things, solar power, but maybe there's some new tech within solar. So instead of these giant panels, maybe it's some piece of plastic you roll out and you can put away on a stormy day or wintry day. So that could be something really good. New clothing designers emerging with spring fashions. We've never actually had anybody ever do clothes, although hoodies count, but it wasn't part of spring fashions. And yes, hoodies, it was a speech topic. You might tell people, what is nanotechnology? We can do that. You can also help your audience learn useful information about early steps for avoiding the flu. Just wash your hands. If you are, near children, make sure that they cover their mouth and wash their hands. All kinds of fun things like that. Chinese customs for greeting and leaving, and that could pick any culture actually, because some cultures have unique and different ways of doing that. It might not just be one culture; it could be several cultures. So you could do different things on that. Travel tips for visitors to Mexico, or based on today's news, travel tips on going to Dominican Republic, where there's big travel alerts going on now. To clarify complex issues, that goal is identify how identity theft works. Pardon the pun, but some people don't really understand the full details of what identity theft really is. You might talk about how the United States addresses its economic problems or political problems or social problems. Well, that might be a little bit too big, but again, you can do it. If you can figure a way to squeeze it into 5 minutes, do it. Who was Ponzi? Now, I think the author is either making a play on this one. I've never been able to figure it out, but Fonzie was a person. A Ponzi scheme is something else. So you might want to change that to, what is a Ponzi scheme? A lot of fraud out there too, and that has to do with identity theft sometimes. The other goal, to demonstrate something useful. How to save a life with a Heimlich maneuver could be a really good way. CPR, AED, nobody's done this. They can't figure out how to do it, but if you're a lifeguard and you want to try to figure it out, you might even bring in the Annie, or the little baby doll, if you can get your hands on. I know they have a baby one now. Good way to do it. The trick is, when you're working with that though, are you able to fit it in 5 minutes and effectively enough to make it work? Now, instead of bringing a big thing in, you might just consider a PowerPoint with word descriptions on how to do this. There's correct way to lift weights, and it doesn't have to be in the gym. It can actually be at home or at work. So there's different ways to do that. Or maybe you do it at home, at work, and at play. Do-it-yourself wiring. Now, this one you want to be careful with. We've had people talk about chainsaws and tree climbing. Nobody's ever done wiring. If you brought in wiring to do this and you're good at it, then it's okay. But be forewarned on that. What you're teaching people, and if they go out and try it and get hurt, it could come back to haunt you. So there's a lot of disclaimers within that. Again, references, where did you get the information from, and who's getting it. You might show how things relate in space, how to make a man's sport coat or a woman's sport coat, or A coat for your dog. My dog came out in heavy rain today and she looked really confused, and I think she forgot a raincoat. I was under an umbrella and she got pretty wet. I didn't. You could show how things relate in space using electronics and green resonance. Again, going back to maybe the new solar tech or even windmills, something like that. Where the major islands of the Caribbean are. That's a relation. Or it could be the solar system or the universe, something big, but again, make it fit within 5 minutes. When we're talking about immediate behavioral purpose with our speech, the action that you want your audience to take during the speech and immediately right after that speech is what this is talking about. Informative speeches target one of 4 immediate behavioral purposes. Now, be forewarned in this, sometimes things don't happen right away in a speech. We don't know that. All we can do is give the information out there and let the person or the people figure it out where it is that they want to go with it. So here's a good example. My purpose of my speech, my informative speech, is to have my listeners correctly explain back to me the main parts of the controversy surrounding the new athletic stadium. Interesting. After hearing my presentation, I want my audience members to be able to provide a meaningful definition for the concept of eminent domain. And when we talk about this in a class, more than half the class has absolutely no clue what eminent domain means. So instead of me telling you, you can Google that and find out for yourself. It's something that actually can affect any one of us at any given time once we own property. Hint. After hearing my presentation, my audience should be able to contrast a real diamond with a cubic zirconia. Interesting. My audience should be able to differentiate between a socialist position and a democratic one on state ownership. Now, your goal, your little quiz right now, it's not graded, but you need to try doing this on your own, is which one is compare and or contrast items, which one of those distinguishes between things, and which one describes objects, people, or issues. And also, which one defines words, objects, or concepts. Effectively presenting information to an audience takes a couple things, well, more than a couple, about 6. The effective informative speaking tips are as follows. Organize content. We need to create information hunger. In other words, you want people to want more. You don't want to give them everything. You want to give them enough to really get them into your topic, to develop that kind of passion, to develop that curiosity that drove you to giving that speech. So creating informative hunger means facilitating a need for information in the audience. Again, create the need. We can do this by asking rhetorical questions. So what would it take for you to want to change your eating habits? That could be a good rhetorical question. If your audience answered, you wouldn't be able to do your speech. It would take too much time. You want them to really get into the speech, but not be distracted by it. So when you ask these questions, ask rhetorical questions. Don't say, who in here, by a show of hands, and don't do that 5 times. You do it once. How many of you in here own iPhones? How many of you in here own Androids? Great. Now, what if there was a phone that could replace both those at less than half the cost? That could be a good rhetorical question to compare and contrast phones if you so choose to do that. Demonstrating information relevance is really important. Information relevance is the importance, novelty, and usefulness of the information to the audience. So in other words, if I'm going to teach you about nutrition in 5 minutes, is it relevant? Now, we could say, well, we've heard this before over and over and over since the 1st grade about don't eat junk food, eat more vegetables, blah, blah, blah. Well, what if there's a novel way of doing that? In other words, learning how to go to the grocery store and actually picking out foods for yourself that you can prepare that can last for 3 to 5 days in the refrigerator so you don't have to go out and spend $50 a day in food. But will your audience care about that topic? You got to ask yourself that. Don't assume they won't, assume they will, because you're going to make it interesting. You can ask yourself another question. Will my audience be interested in what I can bring to this topic? Well, of course they will. It's your topic and you're speaking. They're captives. They can't go anywhere. Will my audience want to know something about the topic that I'm presenting on? Yes, because they're there in class and they want to know. And you're going to get their attention in 8 to 10 seconds. You're going to tell them some really cool stuff. Now, if you answered absolutely no to any of those questions, pick another topic. Pretty simple. Which topic that you have will and how will it impact your audience? Is it going to kind of make them think or make them think? Now, again, don't judge your topic. Talk to me about it, and I will ask you questions to guide you into a better frame of reference on that. Reveal extrinsic motivations right away. This is the reason outside the presentation that the people in the audience will benefit from to hearing your speech. Extrinsic motivations need to be mentioned early in the presentation, not at the end. You don't want to give everybody the information. Now that you've heard all my information, I want you to start off with this, maybe an attention getter. If you do not exercise and if you do not eat right and you do not get enough sleep, you will get sick. It will cost you a ton of money and you will die early, painful, and broke. Well, that's a little hardcore, but you know what? It can get somebody's attention. Now, let's bring that down to our level a little bit. How about securing an internship? This is one of the first things we want to do in college, actually, is get an internship because they're really cool, but I'm going to let you figure that out too. So what would it mean to you if my speech, my information today can help you through an interview to securing that internship that could eventually lead to a full-time job? So my extrinsic motivation is improving interviewing skills to get a job, even though it's an internship that's free, but it's still kind of like getting a job. So tell your audience about potential benefits and the rewards that they can get from listening and remembering your speech. Designing informative content. Consider the following 5 principles when designing speech content. Now, informative content reflects the main points and the subpoints, any illustrations that you might have in a PowerPoint or Prezi that will help clarify and inform what your speech is on. So here's the 5 things. Audiences tend to remember and comprehend generalizations and main ideas better than specific details. So if you're throwing out numbers and statistics, there's that fun word. See, I thought it was coming. Be generalized. People that don't work out generally get lazy and gain a lot of weight. Instead of saying 762,000 people per day don't go to the gym that have their memberships at 552,400 blah 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 blah, they're going to be lost. Okay, they're gone. Generalize, round off numbers. Now, not too big. Be realistic in this and give them good numbers, not bad fake numbers. Relatively simple words and concrete ideas are easier to retain than more complex concepts. If we're going to talk about quantum string theories and the butterfly effect and all these other crazy things, you want to be careful with the description. Dumb it down so, say, a first grader can understand it. Now, that doesn't mean demean your audience, saying, you are all idiots and you don't know anything out there. No, don't do that to them, okay? Don't insult people and don't insult yourself by stooping that low. But dumb it down. Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle works wonders. Instead of using a $10 word, use the 10-cent word, okay? And I think you know what that might mean. If not, we can talk about that in class. Humor can make a dull presentation more interesting. But you might say, it's really dull and boring. What's so funny about it? Well, that in itself could be funny, okay? Again, it depends on your personality. If you're a great jokester and you know how to tell a joke, work one in there. You know, make a comparison. Do something silly. You just got to play with this. Early remarks about how the presentation will meet audience needs increases listening and memory. If you could say, by the end of this 5 minutes, you are going to be so farther ahead in your knowledge than the average person out there, it's going to blow your mind. Okay, I said it early. So this is, wow, I want to get my mind blown. I want to find out what this is. I can't wait. Got the brain cells ready to go. I'm listening. Go. Calling for overt audience response or behavior increases comprehension. In other words, I'm asking you, after hearing my speech, to consider something. I'm not being persuasive. I'm just asking, try this out and get back to me. Send me a note, send me an email, and let me know what you're thinking about this topic in 24 hours to see if I can help you gain any more information on this. You can have fun with those. Avoid information overload. This means too much. Don't just rattle off lists and figures and statistics. People can only absorb so much information at a time, and usually it's not that much. Think about the lectures that you've been in, whether it was grade school, middle school, high school, college, work, whatever it is. You can only handle so much. Now, you could say, I was so into this, I got everything. You know what? Within 30 minutes, you're going to remember so little of it. It's ridiculous. Unless you have hands-on, continual exposure to that topic, the term if you don't use it, you're going to lose it, happens real quick. So please be careful on information overload, a quantity of information. And that same goes true with complexity of that. If you try to teach somebody 5 new languages in 5 minutes, ain't happening. You can't even teach one. But you might teach them to say hello in 5 minutes in 10 languages. You could do that. But again, that could be even too complex too. Figure out 10 different languages that say no in the same tone, and you got it. Interesting. How about hello? Hello might be better. Organize your content. How are you going to organize your content? There has to be a story told. You don't read a book and it tells you the middle, then the end, then the beginning. Well, actually, they do that in movies. So let's pick another way to do that. You want things in order so it makes sense, okay? It's 5 minutes. It's not 90 minutes or a 2-hour or 3-hour movie. First thing, tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them, and then remind them what you told them. Again, I'm going to talk to you about 1, 2, and 3, and then the 4th thing is how it all wraps up together, okay? And I'll demonstrate this in class too. Use transitions and signposts to increase comprehension. We just talked about transitions and signposts in the last chapter. Tell your audience which points are most important and repeat important points for better understanding and longer comprehension beyond a few seconds after the speech into the next speech. Okay, so you want to organize content. Make things easy to follow. You don't want to jerk people around. Think about a roller coaster if you've ever been on one. They are smooth but yet jerky, but smooth in a jerky kind of way. Okay, there used to be a ride when I was a kid. It was called Mousetrap or Mouse Ride, and you never knew which way it was going to go. It was crazy. You could see the track, but the car would turn one way and snap another. They probably got rid of it because it was breaking people's necks. It was a very violent ride. And now you have these rail magnetic rides that they scare you to death at 200 miles an hour, however fast they go, and drop 1,000 feet straight down. Or now they have a negative one that actually goes upside down, straight down, which there's no way you're getting me on that. But you have to organize it just right. So think about the roller coasters you've been on. You don't finish the ride, then start. Skills for informative speaking. Defining. How do you define things? Well, defining, comparison, contrast, synonyms, antonyms, operational definitions. These are ways that you can define the information for your audience. Abortion is a hot topic these days. I hate to even mention it, but the author's talking about it here way back in 2014. A good question is, when does a collection of cells become a fetus? Well, if you're talking pro-life or pro-choice or whatever angle you want to take on this, and you want to define that, you need to be very specific about the details. And of course, make sure you give references. Where did you get this information from? You could say, hey, I'm just a messenger passing on a message. I didn't create this, but I'm concerned that everybody knows both sides of this issue. So then you could go from here. So make sure you define things too. Don't just throw out a word and leave it. Very important that you define things. In describing, it requires you, the presenter, to be concrete in your description rather than abstract and kind of loosey-goosey about the thing that you're talking about. Be specific instead of general on some things. Be more accurate instead of ambiguous in others. When we look at the guy in this picture, we see a bunch of different things. What's the first thing that you see? What's the second thing? Okay. Now, you probably cheating and reading a little bit of this. When I do this in class, nobody can see it, so we hear all kinds of different things. He's happy, he's a protester, I won't repeat what somebody else said, but he's got a microphone in his hand, sunglasses. He's actually a singer. So he's Reggie Watts. But when we look at him, he's a character, a really funny looking character there. And we really couldn't tell just seeing him in that picture what he actually is doing or what he does. So use imagery to expand people's minds. Use your words to paint a picture. But be careful, don't go on too long about it. Explaining things is a great way to develop an idea that simplifies or clarifies that idea while getting your audience's interest in it. If we're talking about global warming and we want to talk about polar bears and seals, and now the puffins are having a problem. There was a huge die-off of puffins the other day, and I'm not even sure. I think they live up north somewhere. But the food chain is breaking down. Well, is it due to global warming or is it due to pollution? That they didn't say, but they knew there was a die-off. So I need to explain what is global warming. Well, it could be that it never stops raining, okay? If you're like me, you're probably getting tired of the rain already, and I know we're having more coming, and it's just not going to stop. But with polar bears, you might show a really emaciated or starving polar bear versus a really healthy one to show global warming. So it depends on how you want to go at it. Illustrating is really powerful when you're helping convey a story or a narrative to people. If we're talking about don't smoke, okay? Stop smoking. It's bad for you. Not really strong enough. You might talk about cancer. And in this case, you can see this tumor is the illustration of lung cancer in a smoker. Now this is a little bit stronger. So if anybody smokes or knows somebody who smokes, this is way more powerful than you can get cancer. Well, what is cancer? When I was a little kid, they actually passed around a lung. And it was black, I remember, and it was very light, and they told us don't squish it. And I remember holding it thinking, oh my God, this is my best friend's mom's lung. Now again, I was probably 5 or 6 or 7, and she had a lung removed from lung cancer. And I thought, oh my God, it's Mrs. Kaufman's lung. And I'll never, ever forget that. And because of that experience, I never smoked cigarettes. They terrified me. And I have a very bad distaste for anybody that does smoke because I'm afraid I don't want to hold their lung. Very powerful story. Huge imagery on this. Using analogies is great in comparing of things that are otherwise dissimilar. So we'll just read this quote by Martin Luther King Jr. from 1963. America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. Interesting. Linking the known with the unknown can help people grasp an idea. So we might be talking about, well, that's pretty open, but it's about discrimination, racial inequality. When you're setting up a quote, you want to say, and this quote is from, instead of just reading the quote. And the reason is this: people are going to think that you're coming up with this quote, and it may not make sense. What you want is the imagery of the person in their head giving that quote. When I say MLK, I know the image in my head of him. I have this historical archive in my head. It's black and white, and it's of him doing speeches. And whenever I hear his voice, I picture him, his face, and people around him doing his speech. But here I see him in rock, in granite most likely, and those words might be here. But if you hear it, it's different. So make sure we quote where it's coming from beforehand. Narration is the oral presentation and interpretation of a study, a description, or an event. When reading to little children, we can use all kinds of funny voices. You can also do that in your speech. Now, some people are a little embarrassed by that. I would not be embarrassed, but again, I've been in front of people almost my entire life. I love doing it. It's so fun. And so do I over here. And me too over here. Okay, so me, myself, and I are giving you this description. Now, that might have just sounded really silly. I'll have to listen to it afterwards. But narration is fun. You got to really enjoy giving speeches to do this. Demonstration is showing the audience what you are explaining. So, how to prepare food. We actually had somebody talk about how to bake cookies. Well, she couldn't bring in the cookie mix because, first of all, in 5 minutes, you can't make cookie mix in 5 minutes unless you cheat and go to the grocery store and pop open the Pillsbury dough stuff. But we're not supposed to have food in the room, so please don't do that. But you can describe it. You can show maybe how to hold your hands when mixing a bowl, because when you mix a bowl, if you don't hold it with one hand and stir with another, it's going to fly off the table pretty quick, right? Physicians demonstrate a variety of procedures and techniques for medical students. When we come up the stairs, you look straight ahead, we have those nurses in there, and there usually has a body part, and they're maybe taking a pulse, learning to do an IV or injection, or setting bones. They actually are given demonstrations constantly of how to do this. Now, in our room, when there's nothing there, it's a little bit trickier, but you can still do that. And again, using your words can help do this. And then people who wish to buy a new computer or car often familiarize themselves with the products via demonstration. Hey, check this new computer out. There's no keyboard on it unless you buy one. Wow, it's called a tablet, and then you can hook it up. We've had people do computers, and you can do laptops, iPads, whatever it is that you have. When you go to buy a car, have you ever bought a car without driving it? We rent cars without test driving it, but generally we know what a car does, but is it right for you? Is it right for me? So that demonstration really makes a big deal. So those are some really good informative speaking skills. You probably will be using most or all of those throughout this course. Visual resources to inform and how to use them. Well, visual aids and whether you should even use them. First off, visual aids can definitely add to the story. They will definitely enhance an informative speech. If you're throwing out numbers and statistics, a PowerPoint presentation works good. Now, generally, I tell people, try not to do a PowerPoint for your first speech. If you want to, hey, go for it. The one reason I don't want you doing it, I don't want people getting too dependent on the screen as the story. I want you to use your words first. But again, if you want to use it, fine, let me know, and I'm going to see it in class, or you can email it to me, and we'll figure that out. But it really helps out. We actually had a young gal a couple years ago do the Mexican Halloween and the Day of the Dead, or Dia de la Muerte, and she brought in the sugar skull, and instead of passing it around, she just kept it on the desk because we were afraid it was going to break. So she had everybody look at it, and people were like, "Oh, wow, I've seen that in movies." And well, now they saw it for real. And she said, "We use this in our heritage, in our culture." So it was really a good visual aid for that. Whether you should use it or not, it's up to you. Again, visual aids are, if you're talking about, wow, Barbie dolls and G.I. Joes, nobody's ever done that. I just picked something out of the blue that popped into my head. I do that a lot. So we're going to talk about the evolution of the Barbie doll and the evolution of the G.I. Joe doll. And, well, G.I. Joe's not a doll, right? Well, if we want to drop those gender things, those two pieces of history in America have made, I'm going to guess, $1 billion. Now, I'd have to, according to who? To Mattel and Hasbro and whoever makes the toys. But it's huge, huge, huge business. So the visual aids might you bring in a Barbie doll and bring in a G.I. Joe guy, and you put them on the table and say, these two things have helped traditionalize gender roles in America. And then you throw them in the garbage can. We're going to throw out all the gender stuff and talk about gender neutrality. Ooh, that'd be different. Nobody's ever done that one. I should try that at Kent in the fall. Wonder how that'll go. Might need a visual aid to sell that one. But you can't show how to change your oil, per se, in a car in the room. Now, PowerPoint or Prezi definitely works. Videos, don't do the video. Do photos. First of all, you can skip a lot of steps with the photo. You could say, and here's how you set the brake in the car. You put it up on the jacks, or if you're me, you go to the dealership and wait in the room, and they call you back in an hour and a half. That's how I change my oil. But that could be one method, depending how you do it. How to succeed in marathons. If you're talking about running, you want to talk about clothing, shoes, proper nutrition, hydration, courses. Do you start flat? Do you start with the biggest hill first, biggest hill last? Making desserts. How do you do this? You can show a picture of it and say, I want to show you how to make this amazing cookies. Oh, now I want to go downstairs and make oatmeal cookies, which I think I have time for. But I can't show it to you. I can tell you how you do it, but it'd be easier if I showed you a picture of it or a sped up video. That could be fun. How about how to play croquet? Anybody ever hear about croquet? Lawn golf with a hammer and a ball. I used to play that when I was a kid. That you could bring in the hammer and the ball and the hoops and the stakes, but it's not the same as showing a picture how it's actually set up. How about how to tie knots for rock climbing? This, a PowerPoint probably wouldn't do, but you might actually bring in maybe a 2-foot piece of rope to show in your hands how this is done. I actually was down in Lake Erie the other week, and the young lady made this chain out of the excess rope at the dock that we hooked up to. I've never seen that done before, and she did it like it was nothing. But for her to do it, the demonstration was quicker than if she showed photos of how to do it. So that's when you might use visual aids for those things. Visual aid tips: make sure they're audience centered. In other words, will it help the audience understand? And will it gross them out or will it help them out? Be ethical about it. If you're talking about, and we're going to go back to the A word, abortion, you are not going to bring in a test tube baby or something that would be very unethical. Even showing a picture could be considered unethical unless you're in a persuasive speech. And then again, I would ask you to consider how will your audience really react to that, because some people puke at the sight of stuff like that. So unless you want to help clean up the puke at night, be careful. Keeping the content used on your presentational aids needs to be clear and it needs to be relevant to what you're saying. If you're going to show a graph and a chart, make sure it's labeled. I actually had somebody bring in a pie chart for their PowerPoint, and it was an awesome pie chart with 3 things on it and no label. And they said the green represents this, the blue that, and the red that. Well, as soon as you blink, you forget what he's talking about. So make sure the labels are on there. Explain the visual resource. What are we looking at? You can't just hold up a pen and say, this pen is mightier than the sword, and then set it down. You need to explain more what you mean by that. The written word lasts longer than the sword, because the sword ends it quickly. The pen draws it out forever and can cure peace throughout the world and blah, blah, blah. So have fun with that. Understand that using resources does take time. It takes you time to prepare it, to find it, to bring it in. If it's too big and it's raining outside, is it going to get wet? Does your audience have to touch it? If they touch it, can they break it? Can they wreck it? How long does it take to do? On top of the fact that it distracts the audience from what you're saying. So try to avoid that, especially in a 5-minute speech. If it's an hour or 2 hours, pass out things all day long because you're going to have plenty of time for it. Don't be too simple or complex in your use of presentational aids either. In other words, don't just hold up a piece of paper and set it down, or show a photo and then change it within 2 seconds. Again, not too complex. If we're talking about how many Legos it takes to build a real life-size house, that's complex. We all know what Legos are, and that's simple. But if you're going to show them how to actually do it and construct it based on geometry and engineering techniques, that you're probably not going to do. Be professional about your presentation. In other words, don't just hand draw it. Unless you're an artist, then go for it, have fun, because maybe that's what you like to do. We had a tattoo artist talk about tattoos and how tattoos are trashy. That was his opening. And then he was explaining the tattoos on his arms. He was a veteran, but it was professional. It wasn't bad, but he only showed what was visible wearing a t-shirt. So that was professional. If he would have taken off his t-shirt and shown us the rest of his story, that would have been crossing the line. Everybody probably would have laughed and had fun with it, but that would have been crossing the line. Hide the resource when it's not in use. Back to the skull candy we did, the candy skull, actually. Skull candy's the headphones. But she left it there. It wasn't bad, but I did see people. I was looking around the room to see who's watching, and people were looking at it. It wasn't distracting. But if it is something very distracting, like money, we had somebody show different money. People wanted to hold it and touch it and see it, and they were asking to see it right away. So if he would have just hid that, out of sight, out of mind kind of deal, use that. So be careful about visual aids, okay? Be very, very careful about what they're going to do. Now, sample informative speech on outline and note cards. I'm not going to go through these because there's a lot of information. I'm going to let you do that on your own on the PowerPoint, but just very quickly, look at these. Okay, this is a great way to start figuring out how to design your outline. The full sentence informative speech outline on Darfur, and for years Hollywood was Darfur, Darfur, Darfur. Nobody knew where it was. You know, even Sudan, barely people know. How about West Africa? Okay, that helps. And the movie stars, of course, they assume everybody knows everything, which makes them pretty stupid. But they needed to describe it more than what they were. And then, of course, the news people followed suit. Full sentence outline, here it is. You can see how they have the body, the main points, supporting point one, supporting point two. Visual aids, the map. The map helps. Now, this is just a map in close. Possibly, if people are not good at geography, you might want to show Africa as a continent that we can tell it's Africa with an arrow and then zoom in. So that would have been even more precise on that. The note card on these, I don't like these because card number one is way on the left. I'm thinking card one should be on the right, depending if you're left-handed or right-handed. I'm right-handed and I hold things in my left hand, so my right hand's free to do the actual motion of moving cards if I were to use them. And if my thumb blocks that number and I accidentally messed up, that's not good. So again, a little detail in speech performance, but consider how that's going to play out in your speech too. And again, they even have transitions written out. I highly, highly recommend write out your transition and practice those transitions. The people that do not practice the transitions usually blow it some way, shape, or form. Work on those. And again, the cards, you can see they're numbered and they have all the same information as those sentences in the sentence outline. Notice the conclusion, thesis, restatement. So they're finishing up the main point summary. You're going back and telling us again what you told us, very short. And then the clincher. In other words, what do you want your audience to walk away with? And finally, references, note cards, and the outline. Remember, you're going to put your outline on your, I'm sorry, you're going to put your references on your outline. You're going to mention your references out loud, and you're covered. Pretty simple, right? In this first speech, you only need 3 references. There should be at least 3 references. That doesn't mean you only have to have 3. You can have 5 or 6. Now, if you're going 10 or 20, it's probably a little bit too much. I would say it's a lot. But 3 to 5 references is the general rule of thumb. Get them on the note card too. It's there. All right, so that's it about informative speeches. Hopefully you have some takeaway on that. Again, we'll be talking about that in class. Just until informative speeches, and those are coming up very, very soon. So if you need to, go back through the PowerPoint. Make sure that you take the quiz by the deadline. You know when that is, and I'll see you in class.